A vicious killer roams the country, taking his victims wherever he finds them. He strikes in cities hundreds of miles apart, then vanishes. Police are forced to rely on few clues as they reconstruct his trail of murder and embark on a dangerous pursuit. In this program, some of the names have been changed. Palm Beach, Florida is a vacationer's paradise. Its upscale resorts and beautiful beaches attract tourists looking for adventure and romance. In the fall of 1974, while visiting Palm Beach, Sarah Mitchell met a man named Darrell Gordon, a self-proclaimed restaurateur. On November 14th, Mitchell's new friend offered to give her a ride to an appointment. The next morning, while they were on their way, Darrell pulled the car to the side of the road. He said he was having car trouble and got out to check under the hood. When Sarah asked him about the trouble, he pointed a pistol at her. He forced her out of the car and started dragging her towards the woods.
No! Darrell, what are you doing? Let go of me! Darrell!
Sarah Mitchell struggled free and ran towards a couple who had moments earlier pulled to the side of the road.
Darrell, he pulled a gun at me!
Darrell drove off. Sarah Mitchell was taken to the Palm Beach police station where she gave a detailed description of the man who tried to abduct her and the Chevy he was driving.
We had car trouble. I don't know what happened. We stopped.
The police put out an APB on the car. An officer on routine patrol received word to be on the lookout for a red Chevy Impala. The driver was wanted for attempting to abduct a woman at gunpoint only hours earlier.
Dispatch, this is Tarzan. You'll be advised.
When the officer spotted the car, he turned on his lights. The Impala pulled to the side of the road. As the officer got out of the car, the driver surprised him. West Palm Beach Detective James Gabbard.
The officer got out to confront him or to find out what was going on, and he came out of the car with a sawed-off shotgun and pointed at the officers and basically had to drop on the policeman.
In the brief instant while the officer took cover below the dashboard, the suspect sped off.
Before the officer could get his vehicle going again, he had lost sight of him.
The Palm Beach officer radioed he was in pursuit and requested backup. Cars were immediately dispatched to the area.
HQ all units, HQ all units.
Police swarmed over the neighborhood searching for the red Chevy Impala. The driver had a head start. He eventually found an empty carport and hid the car underneath. Police didn't know their suspect was now on foot. He was searching for a place to hide out. He found it at the home of Darlene Matthews. Matthews, who suffers from cerebral palsy, shared her modest home in West Palm Beach with her sister. Because of the nature of the crime, Darlene Matthews has asked that her identity remain hidden.
I was in the backyard hanging up the clothes, and I was bringing the clothes in, and somebody came up behind me.
The stranger told her his name was Bob Williams and he was with the IRS.
Yeah, if I could just take a look at it.
Have a good day.
Matthews didn't believe him, but it was too late.
Go away, go.
There was nothing she could do.
He tried to follow me, and I tried to pull the door closed before he, could get in. And he put his foot in the door, and he pushed the door, and he said, "Don't you dare try to touch it." And then he kind of pushed me aside, and he just came in with me.
He pointed his gun at her and told her not to panic. He said he had just committed a robbery and needed a place to hide out until the police search for him cooled down.
And he said to me, "If you scream or anything, I'll just blow you away."
Matthews was terrified.
He said, "Who's here with you? Who stays with you?" And I said, "My sister works at a radio station. She's a copywriter." Well, and he said, "What time is she coming home?" And I said, "Probably between 5 and 5:30 after she picks her son up from nursery school."
He then bound and tied Matthews. He assured her again if she cooperated, she would not be hurt.
I didn't think he would leave before my sister showed up because he needed a way to get out to, go from our house to the next crime he was going to do. He had to have that car.
After Knowles tied Matthews, contrary to his word, he terrorized and assaulted her. As 5 o'clock approached, he went out to wait for Matthews' sister to return with her car. In the meantime, the West Palm Beach police located the red Chevy Impala. They found no sign of the driver. Technicians immediately began processing the vehicle. The first thing they noticed was the car's New Mexico plates.
The car was not in the computer at the time. We had to call out to New Mexico and find out what the status of the car and where the owner was and that kind of thing before we were able to determine that it was actually a stolen plate.
Inside, police found a pistol. It appeared to be the same gun Sarah Mitchell described her attacker using when he tried to abduct her by the side of the road. Police were convinced it was the same car used in the attack. While police processed the Impala, several blocks away, Darlene Matthews' sister arrived home. Deborah Taylor had no way of knowing what awaited her inside the house. When she entered with her son, the intruder put a gun in her face and pointed her towards the room where her sister was bound. Deborah Taylor has also asked that her identity remain hidden.
And everything just happened so fast. There was a man beside me. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't turn around or I'll kill you." I wasn't crying at that time. I was calm. It was so unreal to me.
I'll let you go in a second, okay? Then we'll let you go.
I said, I just cashed my paycheck. I said, I have money in my drawer in my bedroom. And I said, I'll give you the money and I'll give you the keys to my car. I said, just don't hurt us.
He then forced Deborah Taylor outside at gunpoint. He was going to make his getaway, but he wasn't going to do it alone.
He said, we're going to Georgia together. And I said, well, you know, you don't need me all the time, you know, all this time. And he said, yes, I do.
A half hour after Deborah Taylor's Volkswagen pulled away, Taylor's son was able to free himself. He went to the neighbor's house and she called police. Investigators arrived within minutes. Matthews described her ordeal and gave police a description of her attacker. The description matched the driver of the Chevy Impala. Matthews was extremely concerned for the safety of her sister and begged police to find her.
Well, we knew that this individual was desperate, obviously, trying to get away, and taking someone with you is very serious. It's not just like leaving and trying to get away. He's actually taken a potential hostage and kidnapped someone, and also tied up two other individuals, the juvenile son and the sister, and left there. We immediately began to take steps to try to locate that vehicle.
The West Palm Beach police mobilized. They hit the streets and disseminated the description of their suspect in Deborah Taylor's car.
We sent out teletypes and information to all the surrounding law enforcement agencies. We contacted the FBI because it was obviously a kidnapping case, which gave the FBI authority, and they could certainly assist us with lots of manpower.
Now that this case involved kidnapping, the FBI immediately dispatched agents from the Palm Beach office. When investigators learned their suspect had a captive, they knew they might need a hostage negotiator. Agent James Kavanaugh joined the investigation.
I was called because I was the hostage negotiator, and I also do the abnormal profiling for abnormal behavior for the FBI in that area. So, responded to the police department to work with their detectives.
Police continued processing the Impala. They hoped it held some clue to where their suspect might be taking his hostage. Police ran the VIN number on the car to try and confirm the identity of the driver. West Palm Beach forensic technician Greg Parkinson supervised the search of the car.
Using the vehicle identification number on the frame, we searched that through the National Crime Information Center.
The car was registered to a man named Richard Evans from Lima, Ohio. The West Palm Beach police contacted Detective Jim Ketchum in Lima, Ohio to run a check on the owner of the car. Ketchum told the investigators in Florida that Richard Evans and his car had been missing for several weeks. In an effort to find him, the detective had been tracking his credit card receipts.
We started tracing that activity through the credit card companies and the different areas it was being used, different states. We tracked approximately 37 different states where his card had been used.
Ketchum went on to tell the Florida investigators the signatures on the credit card receipts didn't match Evans' handwriting. The detective in Lima, Ohio, gave the West Palm Beach police a description of the missing Richard Evans. It did not match their suspect. The investigators traced the name Darrell Gordon. The real Darrell Gordon was alive and well, but had discovered his credit card was missing a few weeks earlier. He reported it stolen. Police surmised their suspect had stolen the card and assumed Gordon's identity. None of this information brought the authorities any closer to finding their suspect. The technicians continued to focus their attention on the car. Investigators found some record albums, jewelry, newspaper articles, and several items of clothing, including some with labels from a men's store in Macon, Georgia. On the back seat, Greg Parkinson made a significant discovery.
The vehicle literally became an evidence treasure trove. We discovered a document that was a last will and testament that had been dated 1 or 2 days prior to the incident. The name of Paul John Knowles was the name on that document.
The investigators believed they had finally found the real name of their suspect. They ran a background check.
We had the name Paul John Knowles, ran him through the FBI system and the Florida State system, which gave us his identification record for all his arrests and gave us photographs.
Detectives took the photographs to Darlene Matthews to confirm the identification.
You're certain that's him?
West Palm Beach Detective James Griffin.
And she immediately picked out Mr. Knowles as the individual that had been in her home and had tied her up and attempted rape, and is the individual that kidnapped her sister.
While police were beginning to learn all they could about Paul John Knowles, he and his hostage, Deborah Taylor, drove into the night. Taylor was terrified. As the Volkswagen headed away from West Palm Beach, Knowles was continually scanning the radio, trying to keep up with the news coverage.
When we were driving along and after he heard the news, he started getting agitated. And I thought, uh-oh, this man has more than one personality, and I don't like this other side. He's starting to scare me.
Deborah Taylor didn't know she had good reason to fear her captor. Paul John Knowles was a killer. The FBI and police in West Palm Beach, Florida, were tracking a man who assaulted 2 women and abducted another. It had been several hours since Deborah Taylor was forced from her West Palm Beach home at gunpoint. As police tried to locate her, they widened their search perimeter. Investigators knew very little about their suspect, only that his name was Paul John Knowles and he was driving a brown Volkswagen Bug. The most important piece of information they had was the knowledge that they had to find him soon. FBI agent James Kavanaugh.
We put out a nationwide alert for that car with that license plate and the fact that it was involved in a kidnapping. We also, at that time, did grid searches in the entire city of West Palm Beach trying to find that vehicle and the surrounding cities.
Hours before Paul John Knowles abducted Deborah Taylor, he abandoned a stolen Chevy Impala in West Palm Beach. Forensic investigators pored over the car, looking for anything that might be a clue or help them understand their suspect. Agent Kavanaugh began to develop a psychological profile of Paul John Knowles.
And I had obtained a rap sheet for Knowles, which showed a variety of offenses that cover the gambit of everything from simple assault to murder and kidnapping, car theft, which is what we use in the profiling.
For Agent Kavanaugh, Knowles' profile presented a frightening image.
We assumed, based on the number of items that we're finding in the car, the variety of names, the travel interstate of a number of states, that this was not going to be the typical kidnapping, the typical abduction. And that is the reason I was called to start with, because it looked like we were going to start dealing with a serial killer.
The only hard evidence the police in West Palm Beach, Florida had to work with was a stolen Chevy Impala. The Impala was traced to a missing man in Lima, Ohio. Since the police discovered the car, Florida investigators had been working closely with Lima detective Jim Ketchum. In the course of investigating the missing persons case involving Richard Evans, Detective Jim Ketchum discovered an abandoned yellow Dodge Demon outside a hotel in Lima. When he ran the VIN number on the car, he learned it was registered to a Florida woman who had been murdered in her Jacksonville Beach home.
In checking the car, I noticed that it appeared that somebody had been in the car quite a bit. There were coffee cups and sandwich wrappers and all kinds of stuff in the car. So I went on the process for latent prints. I took a latent lift of a thumbprint from the headlight switch.
The West Palm Beach, Florida police forwarded Detective Ketchum Paul John Knowles' criminal record, including his fingerprints. When Ketchum compared them against the prints from the Dodge Demon, they matched. Paul John Knowles was now linked to 2 stolen cars, a missing man's Chevy Impala from Ohio, and a murdered woman's Dodge Demon from Jacksonville Beach, Florida.
With the information that West Palm Beach had given me, I contacted Jacksonville Beach by telephone, advised them that we had recovered what we believe was their stolen vehicle.
Several weeks earlier, the yellow Dodge Demon had been stolen from the home of a woman named Emily Carter. She had been found murdered in her bedroom. The evidence found at the scene of the crime suggested on the night of July 26, 1974, an intruder cut the screen on one of her first-floor windows. Emily Carter was a school teacher. Police surmised the intruder must have awakened her. After he killed her, he took her money. Then he took her car. The next morning, the Jacksonville Beach, Florida police learned of the murder when the woman's son discovered his mother's body. He offered police no solid leads. Her son had no idea why anyone would want to harm his mother. Homicide detectives and forensic technicians processed the home. Jacksonville Beach Police Detective John English.
The officers at the scene checked the house. They found no room disturbed except the bedroom. The deceased, she was bound and gagged and had tape on her.
The crime appeared to be a burglary, but the level of violence was excessive. Whoever committed this crime had come not only to steal, he was a vicious killer. Investigators processed the remainder of the house. They dusted the window and cut screen for prints. They found nothing. All they knew was that the killer brutalized the victim, then took some money and her car. A 1971 yellow Dodge Demon. At autopsy, the medical examiner determined Emily Carter died of asphyxiation from the gag forced in her mouth. The police in Lima, Ohio and West Palm Beach, Florida, now had evidence linking Paul John Knowles to murder. With the evidence that Paul John Knowles was a murderer, police intensified the manhunt. As the Volkswagen headed north, Knowles and his hostage continued to outrun the police dragnet. Trying desperately to keep Knowles calm, Deborah Taylor continued trying to make conversation.
Whatever came out of our mouths all the way on the trip there was nothing but small talk, and he asked me what I did, and I told him I worked in radio, and he said, well, what do you do in radio? I heard you're a writer or something. I said, yes, I'm a copywriter. He said, oh, you know how to write? And I said, yes, and he said, good. He said, this is good.
Knowles seemed curious about Taylor's writing skills and pressed her for information.
He said, well, you think you know how to write a book? And I said, sure. He said, that's good. He said, because that's what's probably going to happen. He said, you're going to be able to help me write my story. And he says, I'll tell you later what it's all about.
As more time passed and the search for Knowles and Deborah Taylor widened, investigators began to fear for her life.
When we first heard of the kidnapping of Deborah Taylor, we had learned enough about Paul John Knowles to feel that there was not going to be that much hope of finding her alive.
As the search for Paul John Knowles and his hostage continued, the FBI uncovered more information about his past. Investigators learned of another Florida case that was apparently linked to their suspect. On August 1st, 1974, at 8:15 p.m., Jacksonville investigators responded to a frantic call. Kathy Johnson reported her 2 young daughters, Laura and Melissa, missing. Earlier, she left the girls alone when she was suddenly called away to tend to a sick relative. She told the police that she only intended to be away for less than an hour. She expected her husband, a commercial fisherman, to return home soon.
Don't go in my room.
Detective Tommy Reeves.
As it happened, the husband did not get off on time. For some reason, they were having engine problems on the boat and could not get home on time.
Mrs. Johnson called to check in on the girls and spoke to them around 6:30 p.m. Her husband was expected any minute. He returned home at 7 o'clock.
When he got home, he realized the 2 little girls were not there. They had disappeared.
There was no sign of forced entry in the house and no sign of a struggle. Police hoped the girls had only wandered off. They began to comb the area around their home. As the search broadened, no trace of either of the girls was found. It seemed they had simply vanished.
A search was organized that covered the general area around there. The woods were searched. Police helicopters were utilized. The motorized units searched the woods and any areas where they might be, and they were not able to find the little girls.
Police asked neighbors whether they had seen anything unusual. One of them told the officers they had noticed a yellow car outside the house the day the girls disappeared. It appeared that Knowles was a kidnapper and a murderer. His victims included men, women, and children. The search to find him intensified. Knowles and his hostage, Deborah Taylor, continued to elude police. Taylor, frightened by Knowles' mood swings, made a decision to calmly keep talking with her captor.
So I started talking about the weather and anything that would come into my mind to get his mind off of that newscast. And it worked. It worked. I had to do that from West Palm Beach to Fort Pierce, and that was over 70 miles.
After hours of driving, Knowles became tired and wanted to stop for the night.
We arrived in Fort Pierce, and he noticed a motel up kind of like on a little hill, and he said, we're going to stay here for the night. And he said, I'm just too tired. And then we'll head on in the morning to Georgia. And I said, okay. And he said, we're married. Well, he says, I'll think of a name when we get to the front desk. He said, I'll think of a name. He said, but we're married. And he said, we're newlyweds.
Knowles checked them into the hotel under an assumed name. It seemed like the perfect place to hide out until the police search died down. Florida authorities had searched for hours trying to capture an armed man who abducted a woman from West Palm Beach. Their suspect was driving a brown Volkswagen. As each hour went by, the FBI and the West Palm Beach police widened their dragnet. Investigators now had compelling evidence that Paul John Knowles, the man they sought, had murdered a schoolteacher in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. They also suspected him in the abduction and possible murder of 2 missing girls in a neighboring town. Police in the Jacksonville area were still searching for the girls who disappeared from their home a few weeks earlier. The FBI was quickly gathering information on their suspect's past crimes, but he continued to elude them. The more they learned, the more concerned investigators became for the safety of his hostage, Deborah Taylor. As the FBI circulated the information they had on Knowles throughout the Jacksonville, Florida area, leads began pouring in. Agents learned the day after the little girls disappeared from their Jacksonville home, a woman named Margaret Hayes had been killed in a quiet suburb of Jacksonville called Atlantic Beach. The same day the woman was found murdered in her home, one of her neighbors gave police an important piece of information.
Thank you for coming.
Well, thanks for calling.
According to the neighbor, on the day Margaret Hayes was murdered, a man knocked on her door looking for someone named Betty Johnson. But she refused to open it. Detective Tommy Reeves worked the case.
And she said that he stood there for a moment, and then he walked off, and he walked back toward the car that he'd left parked. She watched him through the house, get into the car and drive off. As he was leaving, she noticed a little something on the back, some sort of a decal on the back of the car.
The neighbor described the man as a white male, 30 years old, approximately 6 feet tall with light brown hair. The neighbor went on to describe the car he was driving, a yellow Dodge with a distinctive red demon painted on the side. It was the same car taken from Emily Carter's home in Jacksonville Beach.
I had already talked to the Jacksonville Beach detectives and the Atlantic Beach detectives. Having this information on the car with the Dodge Demon on it, we pretty well had it established that Paul John Knowles had done those 2 cases.
The information that a yellow car was also seen at the Johnson home before the 2 girls disappeared gave investigators every indication the 3 cases were tied together. At autopsy, the medical examiner confirmed Margaret Hayes' murder was similar to the murder of the schoolteacher in Jacksonville Beach. Both women had been bound and gagged. They had both been found nude, and they had been robbed. A television and a rifle were reported stolen from the Hayes home. The FBI now had proof they were dealing with a serial killer. They expanded their search and distributed photos of Knowles to law enforcement agencies all over the Southeast. As forensic technicians continued to process the red Chevy Impala, the contents of the car and Knowles' arrest record confirmed FBI investigator James Cavanaugh's worst fears.
It appeared that he was an interstate traveler. He had a car from one place, a license plate from another place, credit card receipts and names from all over. So he had been on the road. We knew he had been traveling extensively. And then the agreement and the items we found in the trunk led credence to this was probably a serial killer that was just traveling the United States.
As each hour passed, police became more concerned for Deborah Taylor. They feared if they didn't find her soon, they might not find her alive. While officers combed the Florida highways searching for Knowles, FBI agents studied his past. They learned he had been a career criminal with a series of burglary convictions. He'd been arrested after getting into a bar fight, the same night Emily Carter was killed. But he escaped from the holding cell in Jacksonville. When he fled, he left behind his personal effects confiscated by the Jacksonville police at the time of his arrest. Among those effects, police found an address book filled with names and addresses of his friends and family. The agents located and began questioning the people listed in the book. None of Knowles' acquaintances had seen him in the past few weeks. Agents also learned Knowles' family lived in Jacksonville. None of his family members had seen him either. In studying his credit card receipts found in the Impala, the FBI learned which types of hotels Knowles usually frequented. Agents fanned out to hotels in and around the Jacksonville area to see if anyone had seen either Knowles or his hostage, Deborah Taylor. They came up empty.
This guy's all over the board, doing all different types of crimes. But his trail that he left behind him had a very distinct trademark, so we would know where he was at. The trick was to try to predict where he was going, to try to head him off.
Agents staked out Knowles' family members' homes in Jacksonville in the event he tried to make contact with them or hide out there. If Knowles had taken his hostage to the Jacksonville area, the FBI was determined to find him. Police all over the state of Florida had been chasing Paul John Knowles for nearly 24 hours. He had taken a West Palm Beach woman from her home at gunpoint. Investigators were desperately trying to track his movements. FBI agent James Cavanaugh pored over Knowles' credit card receipts. He was looking for some sort of pattern that might lead them to the killer. Cavanaugh knew they were running out of time.
We had little hope that we were going to find Deborah Taylor alive because of the profiling we had done on Paul John Knowles. Those type of people do not respect life. They have no compunction about killing. The rules are for the suckers. They don't abide by them, and they do what they want when they want.
As each hour went by, investigators widened their search perimeter. The police and FBI figured that Knowles most likely was headed north with his hostage, Deborah Taylor. They thought because he had friends and family in Jacksonville, he may be trying to hide out there. Police continued to watch the highways. Investigators disseminated information to the major media outlets throughout the state. In his hotel room in Fort Pierce, Florida, Knowles was keenly interested in any information he could find about the search for him and his hostage, Deborah Taylor.
I found out about the crimes when it went on the screen, when they flashed my face and his face, and he was wanted by the FBI, and I went, wait a minute. And that's when I knew in my heart that he'd killed somebody.
Knowles began to tell Taylor about his murderous past.
There were several times that he said that he killed more than one or two, or I don't even know. I think he even said one time he killed 12. I just blocked it out of my mind.
As he talked, she began to see the face of the killer.
When he started talking about murdering somebody, you could just see the evil. It was a different person. It was like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I mean, that fast, he would just trigger off into another personality that fast. And I knew I had to keep my wits about me. And like I said, I kept praying. From the minute I left the house to each time something else happened.
Throughout the night, Knowles assaulted Taylor repeatedly, shifting between states of calm and uncontrollable anger. Taylor knew she was in a desperate fight for her life. The only defense she had was her wits. While the search for Knowles continued, the FBI and the West Palm Beach Police Department continued to focus on their only real clue: the red Chevy Impala Knowles had abandoned before he abducted Deborah Taylor and took her car. Investigators inventoried each piece of evidence they found in the car and cross-referenced it with the National Crime Information Center computer. They got a hit. Some of the clothing found in the car matched items reported stolen during a double homicide in Milledgeville, Georgia.
Hello.
The investigators contacted the Milledgeville police. The detectives in Georgia told the FBI that they were working a double homicide that occurred a week earlier. They went on to explain that someone had seen their suspect. They had a composite sketch, but had not located or identified the killer. The Milledgeville, Georgia police told the Florida investigators that on November 6, 1974, Clayton Cooper and his daughter Tammy had been found murdered in their home. Milledgeville police arrived on the scene along with agents from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. GBI agent Gerald Coffey.
There was nothing to indicate who might be involved. The crime itself, the nature of the crime, was not a typical type crime for this community.
In the master bedroom, agents found Clayton Cooper. He had been stabbed dozens of times while tied and helpless. The room had been ransacked.
Indications were that persons or persons unknown had gone through the residence looking in every possible place for anything of value or something that particularly that they might be able to use or make some use of in terms of firearms or money or coin collections or jewelry or those type things.
In the room next door, police found Clayton's daughter, Tammy. She was lying face down on the bed with her hands tied. She had been strangled. Her bedroom door appeared as if it had been kicked in. Milledgeville Police Detective Jim Josie.
The only forced entry at the residence was to the bedroom door of the daughter. It had been kicked away, the door facing had been kicked in and pulled away from the wall. Apparently she had tried to keep the suspect from entering the room, and he in turn kicked the door in and kicked the door facing loose and gained entry to the room.
Tammy's room had also been ransacked. The family made a list of some of the items missing from the house. They included a diamond ring, a child's watch, and many articles of clothing, including a tuxedo. Inside the house, police found few clues. Neighbors hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary. Investigators had no suspects. Police in Georgia relayed to the Florida investigators that the day after the Milledgeville murders, a woman had seen a man using Clayton Cooper's credit card.
That's not a problem.
When she heard of the Cooper murders, she called police. She described the man she had seen using the victim's credit card. The description matched Paul John Knowles. Officers from Milledgeville traveled to Florida. There they met with West Palm Beach evidence technician Greg Parkinson.
They had one of their agents and one of the detectives working that Milledgeville case come down to West Palm Beach immediately. And when they did, we displayed the evidence to them that we had. They viewed everything, but they keyed in on the Milledgeville related items also, particularly the newspaper article, the clothing.
The evidence confirmed the Georgia detective's suspicion that Paul John Knowles was their suspect. Now they joined the search to find him.
This jewelry, go ahead.
Investigators knew Knowles was a killer, and so did his hostage, Deborah Taylor. For hours, she suffered repeated assaults at the hands of her captor. Throughout the night, Knowles' mood shifted between relative calm and uncontrollable rage.
I didn't want to see that other side of him. I just knew I couldn't get him into that other personality, or I wouldn't be there. I wouldn't be here to talk about it.
Deborah Taylor was in a desperate fight for her life. She was doing all she could to stay alive in the hope the police would find her before Knowles' mood turned deadly. On the next FBI Files, the search for Paul John Knowles continues. The perimeter widens and the agents' efforts intensify. Investigators fear Deborah Taylor is running out of time. As the FBI and the police close in on the killer, they uncover more of his murderous trail. Agents know they must find Paul John Knowles before he kills again. In this program, some of the names have been changed. Palm Beach, Florida is a vacationer's paradise. Its upscale resorts and beautiful beaches attract tourists looking for adventure and romance. In the fall of 1974, while visiting Palm Beach, Sarah Mitchell met a self-proclaimed restaurant owner named Darrell Gordon. On November 14th, Mitchell's new friend offered to give her a ride to an appointment. The next morning, while they were on their way, Darrell pulled the car to the side of the road. He said he was having car trouble and got out to check under the hood. When Sarah asked him about the trouble, he pointed a pistol at her. He forced her out of the car and started dragging her towards the woods.
Darrell, what are you doing? Let go of me. Darrell!
Sarah Mitchell struggled free and ran towards a couple who had moments earlier pulled to the side of the road.
Darrell, he pulled a gun at me.
Darrell Gordon drove off.
Give me a ride, hairdresser.
While police searched for him, he ditched his car and made his way through a West Palm Beach neighborhood. He forced his way into Darlene Matthews' home and tied her up at gunpoint. He then took her sister, Deborah Taylor, hostage. Matthews was able to free herself and called police. but her sister and her kidnapper were long gone. As the manhunt for Darrell Gordon and his hostage began, investigators got a break when they located his abandoned car. In searching the car, police learned Gordon's real name was Paul John Knowles. As they poured through the hundreds of items in the stolen car, they uncovered a series of murders linked to their suspect, including the killing of a father and his daughter in their home in Milledgeville, Georgia. The Milledgeville police joined the search for Knowles when they learned his description matched a composite sketch, according to Detective Jim Josie.
Everybody was just elated that we had a name to put on the composite and the person driving the car. And it intensified from the standpoint of everybody knew who we were looking for. We had photographs of him, and they were just looking everywhere for him.
Police discovered Knowles spent a lot of time in Macon, Georgia, only 30 miles from Milledgeville. In fact, he had a girlfriend who lived in Macon. Agents from the FBI and Georgia Bureau of Investigation spoke with Joyce Kirkland. GBI agent Roy Harris.
She related that Knowles showed up periodically without announcing himself, that she said that he was very kind to her children and occasionally brought her gifts. Somewhat secretive about his lifestyle and what he did, but indicated that he was a criminal. He jokingly called himself a thief.
Kirkland told investigators Knowles was always bragging of his petty thefts. She never really took the boasts of his criminal exploits seriously. She said she had not seen him recently and had no idea where he was. Agents asked if she would be willing to help them recreate Knowles' movements in the past months. She agreed. Milledgeville Police Detective Jim Josie.
She gave us a timeline of her knowledge of Knowles' whereabouts. He even admitted to her that he was at our victim's residence on the day of the murders. Didn't say he killed him, but he admitted to her that he was at the residence on the day of the murders.
Investigators used Kirkland's timeline to search for a pattern in Knowles' behavior. They found none. It appeared he killed at will. Between the murders, he often returned to Macon, where he stayed with Joyce or with friends. Investigators immediately put that information to good use.
We set up stakeouts in Macon at various locations, and thinking he may come back to Macon because he did a lot of traveling between Atlanta and Palm Beach.
Police searched Kirkland's house, and she turned over the items Knowles had given her. These included some record albums with address labels bearing the name and address of a woman from Marlborough, Connecticut.
Some of the items that was recovered from his girlfriend, former girlfriend in Macon, led us to Connecticut based on the names on the record albums. Once we contacted Connecticut authorities, they told us what they had. We started comparing notes.
Investigators in Georgia learned police in Marlborough, Connecticut had been working an unsolved double homicide for nearly a month. On October 16th, 2 women had been found murdered in their home. Homicide investigators from the Connecticut State Police were called to a house outside of town when a young woman reported finding her mother and her sister murdered. The police began processing the scene in Christine Walker's bedroom. There they found the 35-year-old woman, bound. In the next room, her daughter Amy was found in a similar manner. Both women had been assaulted. They both had been strangled. In the era before DNA testing, the Connecticut State Police had few clues to follow. Downstairs, they found indications the house had been robbed. It appeared as if a stereo had been taken and possibly some record albums. Police spent weeks trying to run down leads. They had little to work with until they heard from the Georgia investigators who found Christine Walker's record albums in Knowles' girlfriend's apartment. Investigators had uncovered a trail of murder that crisscrossed the eastern United States, running from Florida through Georgia and into Connecticut. It seemed that each piece of evidence they uncovered on Paul John Knowles was somehow connected to a murder.
We received numerous requests after it was discovered that he had killed numerous people. We received requests from Montana, California, Arizona for prints and photos on Knowles.
As police were learning of Paul John Knowles' murderous past, they still hadn't found anything to point them to where he was. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation put out statewide alerts to be on the lookout for Paul John Knowles in the brown Volkswagen Bug.
People were put on alert. Each shift were alerted that we had a major crime going on at that particular time. However, we did not have a lot of information as to where he might be. So it was just a statewide and a southeast United States continual broadcast that we were looking for this individual.
In and around Milledgeville, Georgia, investigators remained on the alert in the event Knowles returned to the area. While police from Florida to Georgia searched for Paul John Knowles, after midnight on November 16, 1974, he decided it was too dangerous to stay at the motel. He abandoned Deborah Taylor, leaving her tied up in the hotel room. He drove off in her car.
I could hear the Volkswagen start up, and that was the end of it. But I just knew that I had to lay there. I didn't even move. I didn't move until the morning.
Once again, Knowles was on the run. He had allowed Deborah Taylor to live, but if the police didn't catch him soon, he would surely kill again. Investigators in Florida contacted police departments across the Southeast, alerting them to be on the lookout for Taylor's Volkswagen Bug. During the search, investigators uncovered evidence Knowles had committed multiple murders in states as far north as Connecticut. GBI agent Roy Harris.
In a case like this, where you realize you have a very dangerous predator on the loose, everything inside you tells you you've got to get him before he gets another victim. That was the intensity that we were. It was, you're going to catch him, he's not going to get away from us because he will kill again.
At 7:30 a.m. on November 15th, after being held captive for over 30 hours, Deborah Taylor was able to work free of her bonds and call police. After 2 nights of searching, authorities had given up any hope of finding Deborah Taylor alive. Then investigators in Fort Pierce, Florida, received Deborah Taylor's call. Taylor told police she had been tied up in a motel room. She thought her captor had left the motel, but wasn't certain whether he had left the vicinity. The FBI cautiously approached the room. Deborah Taylor had been found.
The time didn't mean anything to me, but it couldn't have been any more than 10 minutes before they had a crime lab, a crime-mobile there, and the FBI and the police and the sheriff. I never saw so many people in my life.
After being abducted at gunpoint and held captive for 37 hours, Deborah Taylor was in a state of shock.
The one man came up to me, and I don't know who, FBI or what it was, he just came up and hugged me like, I just can't believe that you're alive. I can't believe you're alive. And everybody around him, I can't believe she's alive.
At the scene, Taylor was disoriented and couldn't remember much of her ordeal. When she was abducted, Knowles had also tied up her sister and her son. When he took Deborah, he left them behind. Taylor wanted to know if they were all right. The police reassured her that her sister and son were fine. FBI agent James Kavanaugh thought it was remarkable that they had found Deborah Taylor.
It was unusual at that point to have anybody survive. We attributed it to a fact that he did not need to kill her at that particular point of his life. So he left her tied to a bed in a motel room.
Taylor was brought into the Fort Pierce FBI offices to be debriefed. Her clothes were taken as evidence. The police wanted to hear Taylor's story to see if Knowles left any clues to where he might be heading. Victims of a hostage-taking often suffer from a psychological condition called the Stockholm Syndrome. After a period of being held captive, the hostage actually begins to sympathize with their captor as a means of enduring the violence. FBI agent James Kavanaugh knew it would take time for Taylor to see her ordeal clearly.
When you begin the debriefing process, such as was done in Fort Pierce, you usually only believe about 30 to 40% of the first things that come out of the victim's mouth because they are still under that influence of the Stockholm Syndrome. And so you have to allow them time to decompress, to come back to reality and understand that the hostage taker is the bad guy and that the law enforcement, the medical community is the good guys.
As Taylor slowly began to accept what had happened to her, she told investigators everything that occurred. She said Knowles continually talked about going to Georgia.
He was trying to get out of the state of Florida. We knew we had a several-hour leeway because he couldn't make it for probably 6 or 7 hours at best. And we notified all of the police departments, the FBI offices along the way, that any way that would get out of Florida to be on the lookout for her car.
Now investigators knew where Knowles was headed. As they continued to track him, Agent Kavanaugh stressed using caution.
The interview of Taylor up in Fort Pierce confirmed a lot of the things that we had profiled about him. It confirmed our diagnosis, as it were, of what he was like, what he was likely to do, and the danger level that was going to surround anybody around him. When he left Fort Pierce with the goal of getting out of the state of Florida, we were concerned that anybody that stood in his way was likely to get hurt.
With Deborah Taylor safely in police custody, investigators focused all their efforts on trying to find Knowles. They knew they had to capture him before he had a chance to kidnap another victim, or worse, take another life. At 8:30 a.m. on November 16th, just south of the Georgia state line, a trooper with the Florida State Highway Patrol spotted a VW. The trooper pulled the car over. He was not prepared for what awaited him inside the car. Knowles knew he couldn't outrun the highway patrol car. He simply waited patiently for Trooper Charles Campbell to get out.
Hey, how you doing, sir? How you doing? Don't put your hands up.
The fugitive, who had roamed in complete secrecy for so long, was now out in the open. He completely ignored witnesses. Several people who had driven by and witnessed the incident contacted the Florida Highway Patrol to notify them that they had seen a man fitting the description of Paul John Knowles holding a trooper at gunpoint.
When we received information that a Florida Highway Patrolman had pulled Knowles over in a car and that the trooper had apparently been taken hostage. And then it's bells and whistles going off everywhere. Every cop within hundreds of miles started converging on the area trying to find the trooper's car and Knowles.
Investigator James Gabbard, who had been tracking Knowles since he abducted Deborah Taylor from West Palm Beach, feared for the trooper.
Well, obviously, we were very concerned now for the state trooper, and as was every law enforcement agency in the state of Florida. And so, I mean, the manhunt was on then. All bets were off. We knew that he would probably kill the trooper.
Knowles had taken another hostage. Police knew they would have to move fast if they hoped to find the trooper alive. The FBI, in tandem with police departments throughout the southeastern United States, had linked Paul John Knowles to at least 6 murders and nearly as many abductions all over the country. For 2 days, investigators pursued him throughout the state of Florida. He had abducted a woman from her South Florida home. The FBI was relieved to find her alive. But once again, Knowles was on the run. He wasted no time finding another hostage. Just south of the Georgia state line, he abducted a Florida state trooper. Milledgeville, Georgia investigator Jim Josie.
That adrenaline gets to pumping more when you do something to a police officer, because we're out there to protect you. And if you get one of us, then we do our best to do what we can to get them back.
Police once again found themselves chasing Knowles. Agents learned enough about Knowles to know they had very little time to find him. Agent Cavanaugh understood that Knowles was a killer.
He took targets of opportunity as opposed to setting out to do someone or do something. He would just drive. If he got the urge to see something and wanted to kill it, he killed it. So he had a variety of weapons he used, which is not like your normal killer. He strangled, he used scissors, a shotgun, pistols, that type of thing. So he was more of the frenzied type of serial killer, that when the opportunity arose and the urge arose in him, he would take whatever weapons, whatever means were available at that time.
The Florida Highway Patrol dispatcher tried to contact Trooper Charles Campbell by radio. They got no response. They weren't even certain whether Knowles and Campbell were still driving the trooper's car or not. Georgia Bureau of Investigation agent Roy Harris.
We had at this point learned a little bit about the trooper, that he was a young trooper and married, and I think had 2 children. A lot of that makes it very personal to you, that you carry a badge and one of your own is missing. And of course, we would pull out all stops to try to find where he was.
The Highway Patrol continued trying to raise the trooper on the radio. He couldn't respond. When he heard the radio, Knowles must have realized he was in an impossible position. He had to get out of the police car. FBI agents and the state law enforcement agencies began to track Knowles' progress. They knew where the trooper had been abducted and were trying to predict which way Knowles might be headed. The FBI sent agents to every service station along the major highways in Georgia and Florida. They gave the owners all the information they had on Knowles and the trooper and told them to be on the lookout for the 2 men in the patrol car. Knowles must have anticipated the FBI's actions. The patrol car was simply too visible. He needed another car if he was going to make his getaway. Investigators theorized Knowles used the trooper's car to steal another vehicle. Knowles kept Officer Campbell subdued with one weapon while he forced 29-year-old businessman John Stevens out of his car with the other. Knowles secured the men and ordered them into the back seat. Moments later, the men were completely at the mercy of a killer. As the police publicized the incident, they began to get calls from people who had reported seeing Knowles and the trooper. Investigators pursued every lead.
They were working on trying to coordinate the search. It was a lot of determination among the officers that this guy was not going to get away, that they were going to catch him.
All of the leads proved to be false until they got a call. The car had been found. The Florida Highway Patrol car had been discovered parked on the side of the road. When police arrived, a hunter told the officers he had seen 3 men drive off in a blue car. The information was devastating to the police. It appeared Knowles had taken another hostage. The hunter told police he could only make out 2 letters on the license plate. The police officers radioed what they had learned into headquarters. The dispatcher sent out the new information, telling officers to be on the lookout for a blue car.
Anytime you have a known criminal abduct at gunpoint a police officer, and also the other citizen, which he used the police officer's car to stop and take his car, then you know you're dealing with a very dangerous and determined individual. Of course, then we were very concerned for the safety of these 2 individuals. And naturally there was a broadcast all over the southeast United States and looking for them.
While police in Florida and Georgia were searching for Knowles and his 2 hostages, the FBI was still chasing down every possible lead. Investigators had found Paul John Knowles' will. It had been written a few days before the abduction in West Palm Beach. The will mentioned some audio tapes that were in the possession of Knowles' Miami attorney.
We started to piece together the fact that every time he used a credit card, he basically bought a new recorder and tapes. And with his girlfriend's statement, it would appear that he was making a log of his travels and his crimes. So then we were interested in trying to obtain these and see if the tapes would indicate where the hostages were.
The attorney confirmed he had audio tapes given to him by Knowles, but he would not turn them over to police. He claimed it would be a breach of attorney-client privilege. He said he had not listened to them and had no idea what was on them. The investigators started court proceedings to release the tapes, but that would take time, and time was running out. All the police could do was hope for a break, and hope that it didn't come too late. Paul John Knowles was a known killer.
Put him up.
He had been on the run from the FBI for 3 days. In northern Florida, he abducted a state trooper and took his car. As police all over the southeast searched for Knowles, he took another hostage. Knowles had abandoned the state trooper's car and was now trying to outrun police in a blue Ford with his 2 captives. While the search for Knowles and the missing men continued, he left Florida and drove them across the state line into Georgia. He stopped for gas in Lakeland.
Maybe just put up $8 in there, that'd be good. All right.
As the gas station employee was filling up the car, he thought it strange that a police officer would be riding in the back seat.
I dropped these fellas off.
After they left, the attendant reported his suspicions to the police. He gave them a description of the car and the 3 men inside. The descriptions fit the missing trooper and Paul John Knowles. Police still didn't know the identity of the third man. The gas station attendant did see the license plate on the blue Ford. When police ran it, they learned it belonged to a rental car that was rented several days earlier in the Tallahassee area.
How are you?
Police took the plate number and the description of the car to the rental agency. There they learned the blue car was rented by a man named John Stevens. Agents learned where Stevens was staying. They searched his room and discovered that Stevens was an environmental engineer from Delaware visiting a company in Florida. Stevens' employer gave the FBI a description. It matched the man seen in the back of the car by the service station attendant. While the Highway Patrol and the FBI were doing everything they could to uncover background information on Knowles' hostages, police all over the state were trying to head him off. GBI agent Roy Harris.
We had a statewide bank robbery plan, roadblock plan, we called it back then, where you could put up roadblocks in whole sectors of the state, and some of this was done, but at that point we really did not know where he was going. He could have turned and gone south again. He abducted the trooper near Perry, Florida, which is not far from the Georgia-Florida line, but we in our hearts up in Milledgeville thought he was coming back north, but there was really no way to determine until he surfaced again.
FBI agent James Cavanaugh briefed the searchers to exercise extreme caution in confronting Knowles and his hostages.
Based on what I had done profiling, based on the investigation that was conducted to date, it was my belief that it was going to end up in a bloody mess. Knowles was not going to disappear. We were stressing the violence and that this guy was looking to go out in a blaze, and it was going to take, concerted effort on law enforcement's part to pin him up. Doubtful you're going to get him to surrender, and just be careful.
Police knew they were running out of time to catch this killer.
I can't speak for other parts of Georgia, but I could tell you it's probably the most intense manhunt that I've ever seen in 30 years, because he was wanted by a lot of people, and he was a very elusive individual. There were a lot of people involved: state patrol, helicopters, troopers, county sheriffs, local police. Everybody was looking for him.
It had been over 24 hours since the trooper disappeared, when at 1:15 p.m. on the afternoon of November 17th, police finally got a break. A Henry County, Georgia sheriff's deputy saw the blue Ford on Highway 42. But he only noticed one person in the car.
He was staying on the back roads as he drove. We had the sightings for him. Roadblocks were established at the Florida-Georgia line and for various points inside Georgia and south of the line. A sighting was made. We heard via the telephone and the radio transmissions that were coming that Knowles was in the car, but the trooper and the Delaware businessman were not.
Northbound on Highway 42.
When Knowles saw the officer pull out, he raced ahead in the Ford. The sheriff's deputy radioed to have a roadblock set up and waiting just down the rural highway.
Okay, roadblock's ready. We're in place.
No one was prepared for Knowles' level of determination. An officer tried to shoot out his tires. His shotgun jammed, Knowles crashed the roadblock. With his car out of commission, he fled. The officers shot Knowles, grazing him in the leg.
Come on, you see him?
He was wounded, but he didn't stop.
Suspect's heading toward a residential area. He's armed and he's dangerous.
With Knowles now on foot, the searchers called in all surrounding law enforcement agencies.
This was a very massive manhunt, and I would estimate probably it was hundreds of officers, maybe even 1,000 officers from various departments were in that area, from the Georgia State Patrol, GBI, Atlanta Police, DeKalb Police, Henry County Police, and just numerous agencies.
Police set up a command center at the site of the crash. They put out information to all surrounding areas that Knowles was on foot and he was armed and dangerous. They had seen him brandishing a pistol as he ran off into the woods. Police dogs combed the scene to pick up the fugitive's scent. They set off into the woods to see if they could find his trail. They processed the wrecked car. Inside, they found a sawed-off shotgun. By now, Knowles had a few minutes head start on police. The pistol he had been using was out of ammunition. If he was going to be captured, he was not going to go down without a fight. He needed a new weapon. With police now closing in on him, he got lucky. He came upon a boarded-up farmhouse. Knowles broke in. It seemed almost impossible, but inside he found a shotgun and a box of shells. Luck was on his side, and now he was armed once again. Police had set up roadblocks throughout northern Florida and the state of Georgia, trying to capture Paul John Knowles. The day after abducting a Florida state trooper and another man, Knowles had been spotted on a rural Georgia road. Knowles ran his car through a police roadblock. He escaped on foot, but was wounded in the leg. Inside a deserted farmhouse, he found a shotgun and some ammunition. Knowles was now armed, but with the police all around him, it was too dangerous to stay in the house. Knowles was limping badly from a gunshot wound. The police were closing in on him. Dogs were brought in to try and pick up his scent. Knowles couldn't elude police for long. He found his way to a farmhouse and asked for help. Suspicious of this armed stranger, Dave Clark went for his gun. The shotgun Knowles had stolen wouldn't fire. The his luck had run out.
Put it down. Get your hand off of it. Back.
Dave Clark had returned from Vietnam several months earlier and had recently moved into the neighborhood. He wasn't going to let this stranger get away, but he didn't have a telephone yet. So he walked Knowles across the street to the home of a neighbor. There, a woman listened to Clark's pleas for help. She agreed to call police. When they got the call, investigators rushed to the scene. Investigators interrogated Knowles on the spot. They needed to know what he had done with the trooper and the Delaware businessman. They tried to appeal to Knowles by telling him that the men's families were in agony. But he refused to answer. GBI agent Roy Harris.
At the time Knowles was arrested, he did not give any information about the hostages. We were very hopeful that they were still alive, had been left tied up somewhere.
With Paul John Knowles finally in custody, investigators continued the massive search for the Florida state trooper and the Delaware businessman. Hundreds of searchers combed the area between the location where the two men had disappeared and Knowles had been captured. GBI agent Gerald Coffey.
There was a lot of hope at that time, naturally, that they were still alive, and probably was isolated somewhere in a wooded area. And every effort was being made at that time to try to find them or locate them.
Paul John Knowles was in custody, but the two men he kidnapped were still missing. Investigators asked Knowles to help them find the hostages. Milledgeville Police Detective Jim Josie.
Knowles never did tell anybody, to my knowledge, where Trooper Campbell and the businessmen were. At one point, I carried Colonel Beach from the Florida Highway Patrol to the Bibb County Jail to ask Knowles where his trooper was. Colonel Beach asked him for humanitarian reasons, tell him where his trooper was. Knowles just kind of smirked at him and said, you know, I can't tell you that, and kind of laughed at him, and that was a very awful time.
Throughout the night, police combed hundreds of miles of Georgia countryside, searching for the two missing men. From the Florida state line north to Macon, Georgia, they looked for any sign of Knowles' captives. The media was eager for any information investigators had on the crashed car of the missing men.
What was found in the car?
Oh, I can't discuss everything was found in the car, but a shotgun was found in the car, and we are holding that for evidence.
Is there any evidence of anything to do with the Florida State Trooper in the car?
I can't answer that at this time.
You have no new leads on the trooper?
Not at this time, no.
The search went on late into the night as the Georgia State Highway Patrol continued to mobilize as they expanded their search area. As dawn broke on November 21st, police still hadn't found the men, and they were beginning to lose hope that they might find them alive. Later that afternoon, a hunter found the missing men outside of Hawkinsville, Georgia, just south of Macon. They had been shot and were lying on the ground. The hunter alerted police.
Both of them were found face down. They had their arms outstretched as if they were holding hands around a tree. There were handcuff impressions on their wrists where they were handcuffed. But at the time they were found, there were no cuffs. He had removed the cuffs. Apparently he had them cuffed to the tree and executed them. Is the only way you can call it. He shot them in the back of the head.
The two murders seemed to be a finale to Paul John Knowles' murderous spree. But no one could imagine he wasn't finished. Police had searched for days for the Florida State Trooper and the Delaware businessman kidnapped by Paul John Knowles. They had been discovered by a hunter. Both men had been shot. Knowles was behind bars. On the 25th of November, 1974, his preliminary hearing took place. He was bound over for trial and transferred to the Douglas County Jail under the heaviest possible security. John Huey covered the trial for the Atlanta Constitution.
When I finally saw Knowles, it was probably the most. It was probably the first time that I had come face to face with something that I thought to be that sort of unspeakably evil.
Over the next 3 weeks, authorities spoke to Knowles in an effort to get him to confirm or deny the dozens of murders of which they suspected him.
Paul, I need to know some things.
On the rare occasions that his attorney allowed him to reply, his answers mocked the whole process. The investigators wanted to find out what was on the tapes Knowles handed over to his Miami lawyer. When asked about them, all he ever said was that they were his legacy. He offered no usable information regarding his crimes. While Knowles awaited trial, investigators from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation continued to search for the murder weapon, the trooper's pistol. Police were pressing Knowles to help them find the gun. They needed it to establish ballistic evidence linking Knowles to the murder of the trooper and the Delaware businessman. On December 18th, he finally agreed to show police the spot where he disposed of the trooper's service revolver. GBI agent Ron Angel and Douglas County Sheriff Earl Lee personally escorted him to the site. GBI agent Gerald Coffey understood the importance of finding the weapon.
We knew that Knowles was a dangerous and desperate individual. But it was also imperative that we continue our investigation and to establish our case. One of the things that would be crucial in establishing Knowles' connection to them and that homicide would be the finding of the trooper's gun. Knowles had promised that he would show them where the gun was.
GBI agent Roy Harris.
He was removed from his cell and placed into a marked county car without a screen or cage, and the sheriff was driving and SAC Angel was in the front seat observing him.
It was a cold day. Both Sheriff Earl Lee and GBI agent Ron Angel were anxious to retrieve the weapon and get Knowles safely back to the lockup.
A struggle ensued. The weapon was fired and the car lost control, glided off the interstate. And during this struggle, when he was still attempting to get the weapon, the SAC Angel shot him and killed him.
Paul John Knowles was dead. He had finally been stopped. For law enforcement officials like West Palm Beach Detective James Gabbard, Knowles' death left only unanswered questions.
People like me in this business work very hard to protect the rights of not only our citizens, but the people we arrest and the people we come into contact all the time. And no one likes to see someone come to an untimely end. And I think it hurt us that he died, because I think we could have maybe found out a lot more about Mr. Knowles and could have solved a lot of cases.
A judge at the U.S. District Court finally listened to Knowles' tapes. They held a first-person accounting of the murders he committed. They spoke of his quest for power.
And the only way he could get power over people was to abduct them, torture them, make them have sex with them against their will, to have some feeling of power and authority that he never had in his life. And I mean, he could actually take a human life and really for quite a period of time wasn't held accountable for it. And I think he became more and more bold and just thought he could get away with anything.
In the end, Knowles didn't get away. Any pertinent information contained on the tapes was passed on to law enforcement. Agencies in cities across the United States were able to use the information on the tapes to solve crimes and close missing persons cases. Investigators found evidence linking Knowles to at least 18 murders. The actual number of murders he committed may even be higher.